They will build statues for the man who died for his honor. They will write songs of his noble sacrifice, but they will do so from inside the kingdom built by the man who killed him. Power has a secret it never tells the virtuous. The world is not run by good men. It is run by effective men, and the first rule of effectiveness is to understand that fairness is a weapon used against you. Observe the idealist. He navigates the treacherous currents of the world with a map drawn for a different territory, a land of fantasy where rules are sacred and intentions are pure. His worldview is a carefully constructed edifice of principles, a cathedral of what ought to be. He believes in the inherent rationality of his fellow man, in the persuasive power of a logical argument, and in the inevitable triumph of justice. This belief is not merely naive, it is a form of profound intellectual arrogance. It is the conviction that his personal moral code is not a choice, but a universal law to which all reasonable people must eventually submit. He sees the world not as it is, but as a flawed reflection of himself, and he spends his life trying to polish that reflection rather than mastering the flawed reality. His ruin is therefore preordained, for he is at war with human nature itself, a battle that no man has ever won. His strategy, if one can call it that, is one of hope. He hopes his hard work will be recognized without self-promotion. He hopes his loyalty will be returned in kind. He hopes his adversaries will adhere to the same ethical constraints he places upon himself. But hope is not a strategy. It is the abdication of strategy. While he plays chess, meticulously plotting moves within a closed system of rules, his opponents are playing a different game entirely. They are studying his psychology, his dependencies, his attachments. They understand that the most important moves are made off the board. In the whispers in the corridors, in the forging of secret alliances, in the exploitation of his very decency. The idealist's predictable adherence to fair play makes him a perfectly legible text to his enemies. They can read his every intention, predict his every reaction, and lay traps with the certainty that his honor will compel him to walk directly into them. Imagine an architect of impeccable integrity and talent. He designs a revolutionary building, a marvel of efficiency and beauty. He presents his plans to the city council, confident that the sheer merit of his work will secure the contract. He makes no backroom deals. He offers no kickbacks. He does not seek to understand the private interests, the petty rivalries, and the hidden debts that truly govern the council's decisions. A rival architect, a man of lesser talent but greater insight into human frailty, does the opposite. He discovers one council member's financial troubles, another's vanity, a third's secret animosity toward a colleague. He doesn't bribe them directly. He is far too clever for that. Instead, he presents his own inferior design in a way that solves their personal problems, framing it as a compromise that serves their hidden agendas. The contract is awarded to the inferior design. The idealist is left with his beautiful blueprints, his integrity intact, and the bitter lesson that decisions are not made by committees. They are made by individuals, and individuals are driven by self-interest. His virtue was a luxury he could not afford in a world governed by necessity. He was playing by the rules of architecture in a game of politics. This is the slow poison of the idealist's existence. His downfall is rarely a single dramatic event. It is a war of attrition, a long series of small demoralizing cuts. Each time his trust is betrayed, each time his honesty is punished, each time his fair-mindedness is exploited, a piece of his power, his influence, and his spirit is chipped away. He becomes a ghost in the halls of power, a respected but ultimately irrelevant figure, praised for his character but never given command. His nobility becomes his epitaph, a testament to a man who was too good for the world he sought to shape. It is from the wreckage of this noble failure that we must turn to a different kind of teacher. We must abandon the philosophers who preach virtue in their ivory towers and seek counsel from the man who walked the blood-soaked corridors of power itself. We turn to Niccolo Machiavelli. His masterwork, The Prince, was not an academic exercise. It was a desperate, practical handbook on power, written by a deposed diplomat in a last-ditch effort to regain relevance. It is a book born from failure, and so it is uniquely obsessed with the mechanics of success. Machiavelli's brutal clarity comes from his central, unshakable premise. He will not concern himself with imaginary republics and principalities. He will describe the world as it truly is. And his most fundamental lesson is a stark command. A man who wishes to profess goodness at all times will inevitably come to ruin among so many who are not good. Therefore, a prince who wishes to maintain his rule must learn how to be able to not be good, and to use this knowledge, or not use it, according to necessity. To learn how not to be good is not a command to embrace wickedness. It is a command to acquire strategic flexibility. It is the wisdom of the surgeon who knows he must cut healthy flesh to remove a cancerous tumor. His action, viewed in isolation, is a violent assault. But judged by its outcome, the preservation of life, it is a necessary and even virtuous act. The idealist sees only the violence of the cut. The pragmatist sees the necessity of the cure. Machiavelli urges the aspiring leader to develop this same clinical detachment, to judge actions not by their adherence to a rigid moral code, but by their consequences. Virtue and vice cease to be absolute measures of character. They become instruments of statecraft. Generosity is a tool to be used when it builds loyalty, but it must be abandoned for calculated cruelty when mercy would invite rebellion. Honesty is a tool to be used when it fosters trust, but deception must be employed when the truth would empower your enemies. This strategic flexibility is built upon a clear-eyed assessment of the raw material a leader must work with, human nature. Of mankind, Machiavelli says we can state with certainty: they are ungrateful, fickle, pretenders and dissemblers, avoiders of danger, eager for gain. This is not a condemnation, it is a diagnosis. Men will follow you, offer you their lives and their fortunes, but only when the danger is distant and the reward is immediate. The moment the political weather turns, the moment a true sacrifice is required, their loyalty evaporates like morning mist. To build your power upon the fickle foundation of their love is to construct a palace on a fault line. For love, he writes, is maintained by a bond of gratitude which, owing to the wretchedness of human nature, is broken on every occasion that serves their own purpose. It is a sentiment given to you by others, and what others give they can always take away. The prince cannot be a supplicant, begging for the affection of his subjects. He must be the architect of their obedience. This is the great terrifying liberation of the Machiavellian worldview. It frees the strategist from the prison of his own hopes. He no longer wastes energy trying to make men better than they are. Instead, he builds systems, strategies, and institutions that function effectively with men as they are. He understands that the most powerful force in human affairs is not love, nor honor, nor loyalty. It is self-interest, and self-interest's most powerful motivator is fear. Not the fear of a capricious tyrant, which breeds hatred and rebellion, but the cold, rational fear of predictable and unavoidable consequences. This is the foundation upon which a durable state is built. To abandon fair play is to finally see the world clearly, to accept the harsh realities of human nature, and to begin the difficult but necessary work of mastering them. For love is a bond of obligation that men, being wretched creatures, break when it serves their purpose, but fear is strengthened by a dread of punishment which is always effective. Comment: power respects power. To understand this truth and subscribe for the coming lessons in the maintenance of the state. Having accepted the foundational truth that the world is a theater of interests, not a forum of ideals, we now transition from diagnosis to prescription. To merely acknowledge that fair play is a losing gambit is the work of a cynic. To understand how to forge victory from this harsh reality is the work of a sovereign. The embrace of ruthlessness is not a descent into chaos, but an ascent into a higher form of order, one governed by will and precision. This is not the brutish smashing of a barbarian. It is the cold, deliberate, and masterful application of force. To wield it effectively, you must first understand its core pillars, the twin columns upon which any lasting dominion is built. These are the unforgiving sciences of application and disposition. The first and most critical pillar is the mastery of what Machiavelli called the economy of cruelty. The unsophisticated tyrant, the man who rules by temper and impulse, believes that fear is a resource to be cultivated constantly. He commits small injustices, daily reminders of his power, thinking he is taming his populace. In reality, he is merely training them for rebellion. This is the path of cruelty ill-used. It is a slow-acting poison, administered in survivable doses. Each small act of oppression, a broken promise, an unjust tax, a public humiliation of a subordinate, does not pacify the victim. It enlightens him. It creates a lingering sense of grievance, a festering wound that never heals, and instead becomes infected with hatred. Ill-used cruelty is prolonged, inconsistent, and cumulative. It turns subjects into conspirators and colleagues into enemies, because it creates a state of perpetual anxiety and resentment. The ruler who relies on this method is never secure, for he ensures that every man beneath him has a personal reason to desire his downfall. He is the architect of his own assassination. Cruelty, well used by contrast, is a paradox. It is an act of immense violence that ultimately creates stability and peace. It is not a continuous campaign of terror, but a single, decisive, and surgical strike. These are, as Machiavelli wrote, those which are applied at one blow out of necessity for securing one's position, and which are not persisted in afterwards, but are converted into the greatest possible benefits for the subjects. The logic is one of shocking finality. Imagine a city newly conquered, filled with factions loyal to the old regime. The ruler who employs ill-used cruelty would spend years hunting down these remnants, staging show trials, and creating an atmosphere of suspicion. He would rule a city that is quiet but seething. The master of well-used cruelty understands this is a losing battle. Instead, he identifies the core leadership of the opposition, all of it, and eradicates it in a single, terrifying, and public event. The shock of this action paralyzes all would-be dissenters. The sheer audacity and totality of the strike demonstrates the futility of resistance. But then, crucially, the cruelty ceases. Immediately following this terrible but necessary surgery, the ruler begins to bestow benefits. He lowers taxes, respects local customs, and ensures the rule of law. The people, having witnessed the terrifying consequence of opposition and now experiencing the benefits of compliance, quickly settle into a state of secure obedience. The memory of that one terrible day serves as a permanent deterrent, a silent guardian of the new order. They were made to taste the poison all at once, so that in tasting it less, it would offend less. The benefits, however, are distributed little by little, so they may be better savored. This is the genius of calculated ruthlessness. It uses a moment of absolute terror to purchase decades of absolute stability. It is the controlled demolition of a threat, not a prolonged and messy siege. The second pillar of this unforgiving strategy is understanding the duality of your own nature. To be effective, the ruler must embody two contrary spirits, that of the lion and that of the fox. For Machiavelli observed that a prince must know how to act like a beast, and he must imitate the fox and the lion, for the lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. It is therefore necessary to be a fox to recognize traps and a lion to frighten wolves. Those who wish to be only the lion do not understand this. The lion represents overt, undeniable force. It is the power of the army, the authority of the law, the capacity to crush your enemies and make a visceral example of them. The lion's roar is meant to be heard by all. It is the public demonstration of your will, the force that deters open rebellion. When a challenge to your authority is public and direct, it must be met with the overwhelming strength of the lion. To show weakness or hesitation in such a moment is to invite further challenges. The lion does not negotiate with wolves, it annihilates them. This is the power that is seen, felt, and unambiguously respected. However, a ruler who is only a lion is a fool. His strength makes him arrogant and predictable. He sees every problem as a nail to be met with the hammer of his force. He is blind to the more subtle threats, the conspiracies whispered in shadowed halls, the flattery that conceals a dagger, the legal and financial snares laid by clever rivals. He will charge headfirst into a trap because he cannot conceive of a power that is not expressed through direct confrontation. This is why the lion must be guided by the cunning of the fox. The fox represents strategic intellect, deception, and the ability to perceive the hidden currents of power. The fox never takes a situation at face value. It seeks to understand the motivations, weaknesses, and secret desires of all other players on the field. It does not meet threats head-on. It sidesteps, misdirects, and turns its enemies' strengths against them. The fox understands that true power often lies not in what is done, but in what is perceived. It will feign friendship to gather intelligence, create a false narrative to discredit a rival, and set two of its enemies against each other, waiting to claim the spoils from the victor. The fox's domain is the world of secrets, of intrigue, of psychological warfare. Yet a ruler who is only a fox is also doomed. His cleverness will eventually be seen as duplicity. Without the strength to enforce his will or defend his position, his schemes will ultimately unravel. When a direct existential threat arrives, when the wolves finally circle him, his cunning is no defense, he will be torn apart. The true master of ruthless power is therefore a terrifying hybrid, a creature of intellect and force. He uses the fox's mind to navigate the intricate landscape of power, to identify the true threats, and to patiently lay the perfect trap. He isolates his enemy, weakens him with rumors, cuts off his alliances, and maneuvers him into a position of absolute vulnerability. And then, only when the trap is sprung and the enemy is exposed and helpless, does he cease to be the fox and become the lion. The final blow is not a cunning trick. It is an act of total, crushing, and undeniable force. The fox creates the opportunity. The lion provides the conclusion. This synthesis is the essence of effective ruthlessness. Consider these pillars in a modern corporate context. A newly appointed CEO inherits a company plagued by an entrenched, complacent, and underperforming executive board. The ill-used cruelty approach would be to engage in a protracted war of attrition, demoting one, reassigning another, slowly stripping away their power. This would create months, if not years, of internal chaos, political infighting, and corporate paralysis. The Machiavellian CEO, however, acts decisively. Using the cunning of the fox, he spends his first month observing. He identifies the key alliances, uncovers the hidden loyalties, and finds the precise leverage points. Then, invoking a crisis or a necessary restructuring, he calls a single board meeting. In that one session, he fires the entire group, a single clean surgical blow of well-used cruelty. The shock silences all dissent. The very next day, he announces a new dynamic team and a clear vision for the future, bestowing the benefits of clarity and purpose upon the survivors. He was a fox in his preparation and a lion in his execution. He has secured his state. You have been given the instruments of unforgiving power. You understand the surgical application of cruelty and the essential duality of the lion and the fox. But possessing a sword and knowing how to wield it are two vastly different states of being. The finest blade is useless in a trembling hand. The most brilliant strategy is worthless if crippled by a hesitant heart. We must now turn inward, from the external theater of politics to the internal theater of the mind. For the first and most formidable enemy you must conquer is not a rival or a rebellious populace. It is the well-intentioned, morally bound, and fatally sentimental idealist who resides within you. The most difficult act of ruthlessness is the one you must perform upon yourself. This is the war fought in silence in the chambers of your own consciousness, far from the public gaze. It is the battle against your own nature. Humanity is conditioned to seek approval, to feel empathy, to recoil from inflicting pain. These instincts, while essential for social cohesion, are catastrophic liabilities for a sovereign. They are the spectral chains of a morality designed for the flock, not for the shepherd. To hesitate at the critical moment, to be swayed by pity when necessity demands a severe action, to flinch from a necessary betrayal out of a misplaced sense of loyalty, these are the impulses that lead to the abyss. The first conquest of your reign, therefore, is the conquest of your own conscience. You must learn to bifurcate your identity. There is the private person who may possess affections, doubts, and even regrets. And then there is the sovereign, an entity that is not a person at all, but the living embodiment of the state. This entity does not have feelings, it has objectives. It does not have friends, it has allies and assets. It does not judge actions by the standards of good and evil. but by the solitary, luminous metric of efficacy. To achieve this internal state is to become a master of psychological detachment. You must construct a cold operating theater in your mind where decisions of state can be examined with the dispassionate precision of a surgeon. The fate of a man, the prosperity of a city, the declaration of a war. These are problems to be solved, not moral quandaries to be agonized over. The surgeon does not weep for the limb he must amputate to save the body. He simply cuts, cleanly and effectively. Likewise, the architect of power cannot allow his hand to be stayed by sentiment. This internal victory, this silencing of the hesitant inner voice, is the source of true strategic freedom. It allows you to see the entire board, to contemplate moves that the morally constrained player cannot even conceive of, and to act with a speed and decisiveness that will shatter your predictable, honor-bound opponents. This is not the transformation into a monster. It is the evolution into a master, a being who has transcended the limitations of conventional feeling to serve a higher, more demanding purpose, the preservation and glory of the state. Once this internal dominion is established, you can turn your focus to the external world and address the grand dilemma of public perception. Machiavelli poses the timeless question: is it better to be loved or to be feared? The sentimentalist, the idealist, the fool, they all answer without hesitation: to be loved. But a ruler who builds his power on the affections of the people has built his castle on the tide. Love is a sentiment, and sentiments are fickle. It is a currency given to you by others, contingent upon their prosperity, their mood, and their perpetually shifting desires. When you are bestowing benefits and winning victories, their love will be abundant. But when fortune turns, when hard decisions must be made and sacrifices demanded, that love will sour into resentment and betrayal with breathtaking speed. To rely on love is to make yourself a hostage to the happiness of the masses, a condition that no ruler can guarantee forever. Fear, however, is a different matter entirely. It is a resource that you control. A well-managed fear is not the product of erratic tyranny that only breeds hatred, which is an active and dangerous passion. Hatred arises when a ruler is capricious, when he seizes property or violates the honor of his subjects' families. A prince must avoid nothing so much as being hated. The fear you must cultivate is of a different quality. It is the cold, rational, and profound respect for your power. It is the people's unshakable understanding that your laws are absolute, that loyalty to the state is rewarded, and that treason is met with swift and inevitable oblivion. This fear is a form of stability. It is a constant, a deterrent that does not fluctuate with the harvests or the outcomes of distant battles. Love is a plea for obedience. Fear is a demand for it. And, as Machiavelli so brilliantly observed, since it is difficult to unite them in one person, it is much safer to be feared than loved, if one of the two has to be wanting. The bond of fear is fortified by a dread of punishment that never fails. With your mind freed from moral hesitation and your power securely founded upon a healthy dread rather than a fragile affection, you are now ready for the final and most masterful element of this strategy: the construction of the public facade. The world must never see the cold calculus that drives you. They must never witness the internal surgery you have performed upon yourself. The masses cannot comprehend the necessities of statecraft. They judge with their eyes and their hearts, not with their minds. And so you must give their eyes and hearts precisely what they desire: the spectacle of virtue. You must become the greatest actor of your age. Your entire public life must be a meticulously crafted performance designed to project an image of unwavering piety, compassion, trustworthiness, and integrity. Every public act must be a brushstroke in this grand portrait. You must be seen attending religious services, even if you are a skeptic in private. You must make grand displays of charity, even as you approve ruthless measures to balance your budget. You must speak the language of peace and diplomacy, even as you prepare for a necessary war. You must weep at a public tragedy, even if you are privately calculating its political implications. As Machiavelli insists, it is not necessary for a prince to have all the good qualities, but it is necessary to appear to have them. To have them and always observe them is injurious, and to appear to have them is useful. This is not hypocrisy. It is the highest form of political artistry. It is the understanding that reputation is not a reflection of the self, but a tool of power. It is an armor that protects you from the hatred of the masses and a weapon that lulls your enemies into a false sense of security. This grand performance allows you to resolve the paradox of power. How can a ruler be both a ruthless lion and a beloved leader? The answer lies in this division of labor: the necessary acts of cruelty, the deceptions of the fox, the cold calculations. These all take place behind the curtain, in the unseen machinery of the state. But on the public stage, the ruler is always merciful, faithful, and humane. He may even delegate unpopular but necessary actions to a subordinate, whom he can later punish publicly, to restore the people's affection and reinforce his own image of justice. He understands that men are so simple and so subject to present necessities that he who seeks to deceive will always find someone who will allow himself to be deceived. Your subjects want to believe you are good. Your performance gives them the permission to do so. This facade is the ultimate weapon. It is the silken glove that conceals the iron fist, allowing you to shape the world to your will, not through brute force alone, but through the far more potent magic of engineered perception. You have walked through the crucible of pragmatism. You have learned to see the world not as it should be, but as it is. You understand the grammar of fear, the architecture of deception, and the internal fortitude required to command. Now we arrive at the culmination of this dark wisdom. You have learned to think like a sovereign. It is time to learn how to act like one. Before we unveil the capstone, the singular explosive act that can chisel a legacy from the raw stone of history, ensure you are subscribed. This final revelation is not for the timid. It is reserved for the architects of epochs, for those who do not merely wish to participate in the future, but to dictate its terms. The life of any aspiring power is a relentless struggle between two great forces: Fortuna, the tempestuous river of chance, circumstance, and chaos that governs the affairs of men, and Virtù, the dam of human will, the dikes of strategic audacity, and the canals of disciplined action that seek to channel this chaotic energy toward a chosen destination. The common man is a piece of driftwood upon this river, tossed about by currents he cannot control. The strategist, however, is a hydraulic engineer. He studies the river's flow, understands its power, and waits for the precise moment, the moment of perfect alignment between the landscape and the current, to execute his grand design. This is the nature of the masterstroke. It is not a random act of violence. It is a moment of profound political alchemy, where a singular decisive action, born of supreme virtù, seizes a fleeting opportunity presented by Fortuna and permanently alters the course of history. This is the moment of execution, the point where all calculation, all deception, all psychological preparation crystallizes into a single, irreversible deed. It might be the public and brutal elimination of a rival who thought himself secure, or the sudden dissolution of an ancient council that had grown complacent and obstructive. It might be the exposure of a vast conspiracy, orchestrated by the prince himself, to entrap all his hidden enemies at once. Whatever its form, the masterstroke is defined by its totality and its timing. It is not a skirmish, it is the war's final, shocking conclusion. As Machiavelli so astutely counseled, injuries ought to be done all at once so that, being tasted less, they offend less. The psychology here is paramount. A prolonged campaign of purges and punishments creates a state of enduring terror and deep-seated hatred. It is a slow bleeding that weakens the entire body politic. A single, catastrophic blow, however, has a different effect. It is an amputation. The initial shock and horror are immense, but they are finite. The act is so total, so final, that it cauterizes the very possibility of resistance. It does not create lingering enemies seeking revenge. It creates a stunned and sober populace that understands, with absolute clarity, the new reality. It is the lightning strike that clears the oppressive humidity from the air, leaving behind a terrifying but stable calm. This decisive action is the ultimate expression of the lion, guided by the flawless intelligence of the fox. The preparation for it may have taken months, even years of patient observation, of feigning weakness, of luring your adversaries into a state of arrogant self-assurance. You allow them to believe they are winning, that you are the naive idealist. You let them spin their webs, unaware that you are the spider. Then, when they are all gathered, all exposed, all committed to their treacherous course, the trap is sprung. The strike is not just physical, it is psychological. It is designed to shatter not just their bodies, but the very idea that opposition to your will is a viable option. It is a spectacle of power so profound that it becomes the founding myth of your reign, a story told in hushed tones for generations to come, a permanent warning etched into the collective memory of your state. But here lies the final critical distinction between a mere tyrant and a true founder. The masterstroke is not the end, it is the beginning. It is the violent clearing of the ground upon which a new enduring structure must be immediately built. The amateur is intoxicated by the moment of victory and rests upon his laurels. The master understands that the moment of his enemy's collapse is the moment of his own greatest vulnerability. He has created a power vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. He must fill it instantly and completely with his own authority, his own institutions, his own people. The true victory is not the event, but the enduring stability that follows. This is the grand project of consolidation. Immediately after the decisive blow has landed, the architect of power works with ferocious speed. The old loyalties must be extinguished. The families, factions, and institutions that supported the old regime must be either systematically dismantled or fundamentally repurposed to serve the new order. You do not merely defeat your enemies, you erase their very foundations of power. Simultaneously, you must elevate a new class of men, men of talent and ambition, who owe their rise entirely to you. Their loyalty is not a matter of tradition or affection, it is a matter of enlightened self-interest. Your survival is their prosperity. You embed your authority not in the fickle hearts of the general populace, but in the vested interests of a powerful new elite of your own creation. You rewrite the laws. You establish new councils. You recalibrate the entire constellation of power so that all orbits are centered on you, the sun of this new political universe. You transform your violent seizure of power into a legitimate, functioning, and self-perpetuating stato, a state, a structure, a lasting condition. And so we arrive at the ultimate philosophical conclusion. The path of the sovereign, as illuminated by Machiavelli, is not a journey into evil. It is a journey beyond the primitive lexicon of good and evil altogether. Such terms are the moral luxuries of private citizens, the comforting illusions of those who will never bear the crushing responsibility of command. The world is, and always will be, an arena of chaotic, competing forces. The vast majority of humanity is swept along by this chaos, living and dying according to the whims of fortune. The sovereign is the rare individual who possesses the clarity to see this reality, the intellectual ruthlessness to devise a strategy to master it, and the unshakable courage to execute that strategy, no matter the psychological or moral cost. Supreme power is not about indulgence or cruelty for its own sake. It is about efficacy. It is about the imposition of human will upon a world that is inherently without order. It is the lonely, terrible, and magnificent burden of being the architect of stability in a world predisposed to decay. The throne you build through these methods is not a seat of comfort. It is a watchtower. It is the lonely outpost from which you stand guard against the ever-present forces of chaos, both from without and from within. It is the ultimate testament to the idea that history is not something that happens to men. It is something that is made by them. It is forged in the fires of ambition, shaped by the hammer of a singular will, and cooled into a lasting form by the cold waters of pragmatic reason. For in the end, history does not remember the good man who was swept away by the tide. It carves into eternity the name of the man who had the audacity to become the storm.